Hey there! In 2007, Half-Life Residual Point released. The first mod of the Residual Saga, a Korean-made Half-Life 1 mod series that upon first glance seems like a very normal trilogy of mods. Mods that let you experience a new perspective of the events of Black Mesa. Once you start digging deeper, however, you come across what is without a doubt the craziest and most mysterious series of mods I've ever played. With dozens of unbelievably complex branching paths to be explored that all somehow interconnect with each other and build up a whole new lore of a battle of demons and gods and even more insane things. Seriously, I almost went insane trying to decipher everything. Today, I will once and for all decode and untangle the mysteries of the Residual Saga and try to understand what the story behind these mods is, and also review them. Residual Point starts off like any Half-Life 1 mod would, a tram ride. We play as Biodome Laboratory Research Associate W. Jack Sun. And it's immediately noticeable that the creator of this mod has a ton of talent. The environments are detailed, lots of NPC scripting going on. The beginning reminds you of a lot of things. Mainly I was reminded a lot of Blue Shift, to the point where certain areas felt like direct copies, which is something that will only become more important as this video goes on. Relatively quickly do we get this mod's version of the Resonance Cascade. We walk through some cool looking aquatic areas of the Black Mesa facility, to then do a teleportation experiment that ends with us trapped in Zen. And for some reason the author of this mod thought it would be a good idea to replace some of the Zen fauna with metallic nude women. I'm talking fully modeled. This is never brought up again in the mod, so I'm not going to do it either. Perhaps it's meant to be artistic or something, not sure. We find our way back through a portal and then the mod continues like most others. What also continues is a trend. We have the chapter Office Facility that feels a lot like Office Complex of Half-Life 1. Residue Pit, which is similar to Residue Processing. Bombing Surface, which is similar to Surface Tension, and a few more. To this mod's credit, it is doing a great job at reinterpreting these areas, and anything that isn't essentially a remake is done well too. The mod is hard, very hard even, but if what you're looking for is a reimagining of Half-Life 1 with some new spins on certain environments, Residual Point may be the mod you're looking for. It will easily take you over 3 hours to beat, which leads to some chapters feeling stretched. I also found myself often getting lost because the game sometimes requires you to backtrack a bunch, which adds a permanent insecurity to your playthrough that you may be going to the wrong direction entirely. Getting to the next level loading screen was always a huge relief. Another first of the saga is the introduction of split paths, something that the mod will only lean more into as time goes on. For now we have 2 paths that can be dubbed as parking route and sewer route. These take you on solid 30 to 60 minute completely separate adventures before reconnecting you at the same point. In this case this is purely for replayability purposes, no lore or anything. Another funny moment is the player running into the same teleportation chamber as Gordon did in Half-Life 1, making Jack Sun the 4th person at least that has done this. We got Gordon, followed immediately by Adrian Shepard, followed by just Barney of Azure Sheep, then followed by Jack Sun. This is like the most visited room in the extended Half-Life universe. The Zen levels are notable in that they feature a new unique idea, which is a on a rail style segment, in Zen. It's not as tedious as on a rail on a whole though, don't worry. In fact, you can ditch the cart for long periods of time in between. The split ways return at the last chapter of the mod, Dreadplot, from which point forward you can achieve 3 total endings. The ending you are most likely to get is one where you make it past some Gonags and Zen, step into this ominous red portal, twice, then the game ends. This is the most boring of them all by far. The second ending is achieved by getting to the same portal but then shooting all of the crystals surrounding it. Entering the portal afterwards will instead teleport you to a chapter called Residual Point. The environments look similar to Forget About Freeman of Half-Life 1 or some of the later Opposing Force levels. The skybox however makes it look like this level is set in Zen. Though as for the whereabouts of this short set of levels, I have another theory later down the line. It wouldn't make sense now, trust me. This ending is rather uneventful. We take out some Black Ops soldiers, escape, to which we see some inner dialogue that says, "Whatever the process, I escaped. This is just a dreamlike reality?" Unfortunately, this was not a dream, at least for me. What is left is ending 3, the most random of them all. During this on a rail-like section in Zen, you have to find the specific barricade, destroy some of it, then the secret door will open, which will have you venture through some alternate Zen levels to eventually reach the same red portal. This time, however, we also see the G-Man talking to our dear Jack Sun. Residual Point on its own is definitely one of the better Half-Life 1 mods there is, with a story that seems to mostly just be a retelling of Half-Life 1. It's got some cool events, some few intriguing mysteries, and some few new enemies like headcrab variants with some pretty solid level design and some replay potential given the multiple paths. Though to be fair, if you were never told about it, you would likely never know. It's very easy to miss. We thus arrive at Residual Life, the direct sequel, which is a weird concept for Half-Life 1 mods, as the time frame of Half-Life usually is too short to fit sequels. Residual Life thought of a clever solution though. which is to have the G-Man rewind time and you awake suddenly in a small living quarter of Black Mesa. This also reverts all events done by Gordon Freeman, meaning this mod is now set in a different timeline. Most likely at least, as it's never explicitly stated, as we now play as someone else. You go to a tram on your own, at which point the regular intro sequence starts. The intro is how you find out that the adventures of Jack's son are over for now, as you now play as W. Sora Kim, the reactor operation engineer at the Lambda complex. It is worth noting that the entire Residual saga was seemingly completely made by one guy. All the names you see in the bottom corner are simply figures the creator likes. This goes from Mark Laidlaw and James Cameron to Hiromu Arakawa and Hajime Kanzaka, who made the full Metal Alchemist and Slayers novels respectively, which will be very important. Residual Life again recreates certain aspects of the Half-Life games, but definitely stands out as its own thing this time. More unique environments and chapters, and again, it's a very hard mod. There's truly an endless amount of combat and certain puzzles that had me running around the same few corridors for ages. You have to seriously buckle up if you plan on playing this mod. What you're seeing in the footage right now is where the mod originally ended on a sudden cliffhanger, and the protagonist seemingly dying. This was later updated in one of the mod's many updates. It first released in 2012, but got updates all the way up to 2020, which greatly extended its gameplay. Up to this point, it has only been about an hour of gameplay. If you plan on doing every path and ending now, it might genuinely take you 20 hours, if not a lot more, to play them all. Let me first give you the route you'll most likely end up experiencing before getting into all the paths and huge mysteries. You end up using a teleporter, which first takes you into this dark void area with an odd statue. We hear the G-Man say, "Time to choose," and then get teleported to this altar in the middle of nowhere. The G-Man continues by saying, "I think you fully realize reality, so I'll ask again. Yes, I am talking directly to your mind. Enter the portal and you will be freed from this pain. If you step into the portal, the game will end, with Kim being out of range. Otherwise, you will get teleported to the next chapter, right next to a Gargantua. Eventually, you'll find your way deeper into the facility, come across some new environments like this ginormous Zen crystal, this presidential bunker-looking area, and eventually find this room, a giant Zen crystal held by a dark metallic construct. Heading below it, you find this altar, very similar to the one we teleported to. Upon its activation, you will be brought to the Impossibility Dream chapter, which takes you on a tram ride at night before a security guard turns out to be the G-Man and says, "You're not supposed to be here. Forget about all this." Which then takes you to the epilogue, in which you basically only run away from enemies. At the end, you enter a spaceship to which Kim says, "I'm still not sure why me and that ship are here that night. It was just a dreamlike coincidence, too. Otherwise, this was part of the big plan. I'll see it someday." The Impossibility Dream and Epilogue notably appear at the very end of every ending. You can see both of them as one big epilogue. Impossibility Dream seems to hint at another timeline reset, which makes sense given Residual Agent existing. That being said, we are far from done analyzing the story of this mod. So, let us head back. Where do the secrets begin? It's before the mod even starts actually. To unlock the secret path at the end, you'll have to be playing on the hard difficulty, as if this mod wasn't hard enough already. Then, after you get your suit, you can find 2 batteries in one of the scientist's labs. This unlocks a secret path and is one of the many secrets needed to unlock the biggest hidden chapter of this mod. The next secret involves climbing up barely walkable ledges into a vent, where you'll find a reskinned headcrab. Killing it will give you the Demon Slayer achievement, which is another achievement needed to unlock the big secret chapter. We then have to find both Circles of Death, which is by far the most unfair achievement and not findable unless you use a guide. One is in these toilets and involves you throwing a grenade strategically to blow open this stall. The other one is found in these flooded offices. We then have to get the Chaotic Butcher achievement, which you unlock by clearing 2 different fields, both featuring an unfairly huge amount of headcrabs. After this, you'll have to backtrack to find 2 purple cells. These are 2 of 5 needed cells to find an optional boss in the secret path you unlock. I told you this mod is complex. It is also here that we find a mysterious laptop talking about a sacrifice of sorts. The message seems to be damaged, but we will eventually be revealed the full one, which I'll save for the story analysis. You then return to find this hidden path, which in and of itself is just an alternate path in this mod. But it features another optional path inside the optional path that will only unlock if both Chaotic Butcher achievements are completed. In this alternate path you will find the gluon gun, the Tau cannon and most importantly, the gravity gun. It's not actually usable in combat, but is required for an alternate path in the secret path that unlocks the hidden boss in the secret path. It is this complex. There's then another alternate path you could take through Zen. This one truly is purely optional, and will actually end up being an environment seen again in Residual Agent, the third release of the Residual saga. We now arrive at an important choice in this mod. There's 2 completely different routes you can take. Depending on how you look at it, You are now in front of 6 different paths you can choose. We're gonna start with the one we've been building up to, for which we'll jump down into the canals. There is another optional chapter that will only unlock if you've completed all the secrets thus far, and takes place in the Chaotic Blue Labs. You're gonna be hearing that name a lot more down the line. There's some imagery found here that will end up being crucial to the lore of this mod, including either a replica or a discovered altar similar to the ones we've seen before, and this weird black orb in another dimension that seems to be getting charged by this device, which we end up disabling. We then proceed with the mod as most players probably did on their first playthrough. This time, however, instead of the altar in the Center of All Things chapter ending the game for you, you will now arrive at the Sun Eater's Pillar. The Sun Eater's Pillar makes for the most clear showcase that this is a different timeline than the one of regular Half-Life. The Sun Eater's Pillar seems to be a mix of the Combine and Zen creatures at the same time, all under the leadership of the Tiny Dwarf, which is the name of the boss fight we unlock by collecting the 5 cells, which is what we'll get to next. The third one is unlocked by sacrificing a gravity gun, which opens a portal to the Chosen Reservoir. This is the same level seen in the epilogue. This time it's set at day though. These levels seem to be based on the battle that happened at the real-life Chosen Reservoir in the Korean War in the 1950s, a topic that the creator of this mod seems to hold a lot of resentment over, as we'll come to find. We find the third purple cell and then return. The Sun Eater's Pillar chapter is by far the largest one of this mod, larger than the entirety of the mod up to this point even, and definitely also the hardest, with countless battles against all kinds of enemies. Combine not included, by the way. The only time we get a glimpse at Combine is this secret scene where we see the G-Man in an elevator with a hunter. I think I can confidently say that playing this mod and unlocking all the secret paths without cheating is easily the hardest challenge a Half-Life player can partake. Hell, it's even a chore with cheats. We come across more laptops here, including the one that sent the message we saw earlier. But I'll again save this for the later story analysis. Trust me that this makes it easier. We find the last 2 purple cells in these levels, and eventually get to face the Tiny Dwarf. This can only be done if you've collected all 5 purple cells. The boss fight is insanely hard. Once you do defeat it, you see this scene. A black orb floating in front of a gate in the middle of nowhere. You again get talked to telepathically. Finally, you and I connected, and sadly, I was liberated. We are echo of all things. We showed knowledge of other worlds, and I told them the cruel truth. I tried to give them a chance of choose. Bear in mind this was done using Google Translate many years ago. I don't know if it was a rebellion. They didn't. If you didn't know, ask them. All of them know. Hiding this fact may seem like a crime. It's time to go. Ruby Eye system is key. The gate opens and then we get placed back to where we were, with one large final battle at the Sun Eater's Pillar before us, which will abruptly end with the same tram ride at night. You may still be left questioning, what the f does all this mean? And that is more than understandable. And we have yet to get to the final path of this mod, after which I promise to explain everything. If instead of jumping down into the canals you save a scientist and have him unlock a door, you come across a new path of this mod. You don't need to complete any secrets to get here. This will have you fight a bit through Black Mesa until you encounter a nuclear bomb. The same one seen in Opposing Force, though this time at a different location. Approaching it with the nuke explodes and seems to catapult you right into Zen, a very unique part of Zen. You find lots of structures, like those of ancient civilizations. You also come across some technology and lots of other weird little things. What is more important is that about half an hour into this, you will find this thing, a talisman. This is crucial to unlocking the real ending of this path. And thankfully, this is the only thing we have to collect. Eventually we come across this building that features a large stairway, looking mostly like Combine technology, oddly enough. At the top we find another altar. Activating all the buttons opens up a portal. If you didn't collect the talisman, you will be placed in front of the gate in the void again. It will open and an eye will peek out of it, to which you'll be teleported to the middle of the other route. If you unlocked all secrets, it is possible to do the Sun Eater's Pillar from this point forward, making it the longest possible singular path. If you do have the talisman, however, the gate will instead speak to you. It will ask, why do you carry the void key? I can see you are putting on a screen of indifference. I feel you can help me. Which will transport you to the Altar of Sacrifice. This is another boss fight, fighting against what looks to be a black-green version of a ghost enemy from the Mario games. It also speaks to us. Even now I can see you, fresh female. Come to me for the one universe. This boss fight is a reskinned Nyland fight. This time, however, you have to destroy the energy sources in the worlds you get teleported into. 4 worlds, which each of the pillars in this area represent respectively. The 4 worlds consist of one with a small Zen pond, a dark void with floating Zen islands, a white void, and most interestingly, an earthy version of the very first room of this mod. After completing the boss fight, the message says that you have destroyed the talisman system, and you get taken to the Impossibility Dream chapter once more, which makes for all the possible paths of Residual Life. I'm gonna very briefly cover Residual Agent before trying to untangle the mysteries, secrets and lore, as Residual Agent is a very short mod thus far and only contributes little to the overarching story. In its current version, Residual Agent starts with a training course that takes place in the Sun Eater's Pillar, and some of the Zen levels seen in Residual Life. This mod has you play as a headcrab, and actually has many mechanics including a level up system that accompany it. You can take over humans and soldiers as well. The actual campaign starts with the G-Man reviewing what happened in Residual Life, saying, "Some say this report has a certain shape. Also, no matter how hard you try, you cannot avoid catastrophe." We are then transported through the Sun Eater's Pillar, seeing it working in action. The Combines simply seem to not exist in this mod, at least not yet at this point in the timeline. Remember, it seems like the G-Man reset everything once more, which is actually a fair representation of how unfair time travel powers are. Outside of this mod is about what you'd expect. You run through Black Mesa, taking over people and progressing a campaign with no particular goals thus far. Interestingly enough, after the first 2 chapters, there's a total of 4 paths you can take in the chapter Canal of Blood. The mod ends shortly afterwards though, so currently there are no grander secrets or anything. And given that the last update to this mod happened over 4 years ago, it's unsure if it will ever be continued. So, let's finally get to the fun part, untangling the story. Let me first introduce the most important characters in this mod story. We have the G-Man, of course, who seems to be wanting some catastrophe to happen. We have the Mario Ghost, who's somehow in charge of a talisman system. We have the Black Orb, one that I reasonably suspect to be the tiny dwarf boss fight. And we have the gate in the middle of nowhere. How do all these connect? For this, I'm going to have to explain some of the stories Residual Life takes inspiration from. I mentioned that the beginning credits include the writers of Slayers and Full Metal Alchemist. Let us start by taking a look at Slayers. Slayers is a pretty niche anime to say the least, the anime of which ran from 1995 to 2009 with a total of 104 episodes. There's many remakes of the show and they all tell a slightly different version of the story. There are a few aspects which are key though. Slayers follows the adventures of Lena Inverse and her friends. They fight demons using magical powers. The most powerful being is the Lord of Nightmares, the creator of 4 parallel worlds: Ruby Eye, Darkstar, Chaotic Blue and Deathfog. The Lord of Nightmares wants to achieve its true form, which can only be done by destroying all 4 worlds. In Slayers, each of these worlds feature gods and demons who are in a forever battle. If the gods win, the world remains at peace. Should the monsters win even once however, the world will be destroyed and return to the Sea of Chaos, which is the world that exists outside of the physical planes of the world. The Sea of Chaos is also one and the same as the Lord of Nightmares. The Slayers anime itself takes place in the Ruby Eye plane of the world, and not a lot is known about the other planes, other than that they have their own gods and demons, which sometimes appeared in the shows. The parallels are quite easy to see. The Chaotic Blue chapter doesn't only have the same name as one of the world planes in Slayers, it also features this illustration of the worlds, which is taken directly from people explaining the Slayers world. The Dark Golden Lord is another name for the Lord of Nightmares, and it's said that a small portion of the Lord of Nightmares exists in each plane of the world. And this in combination with this illustration leads me to another theory. In Mark Laidlaw's book The Third Force, which heavily inspired elements of Half-Life and is credited in the end credits of this mod, the equivalent of Zen crystals is a source of infinite energy on top of time and space-bending properties. It's also said that the Xenium is conscious in some way, that it's alive. I believe that the Dark Golden Lord / Lord of Nightmares comes from the Sea of Chaos, just like it does in Slayers, and Zen crystals is the Dark Golden, as is said in this image. Thus, the Lord of Nightmares, aka Lord of Dark Gold, charges itself using Xenium that is getting its energy right out of the Sea of Chaos, the source of everything, which is exactly what happens in the Altar of Sacrifice. The Dark Mario Ghost is the Dark Golden Lord, the Lord of Nightmares, and we destroy the Zen crystals in the 4 planes of reality, which is further evidenced by the symbols on top of the towers. Ruby Eye, which is the Zen pond, Darkstar, which is basically just darkness, Chaotic Blue, which is the intro map made out of Zen dirt, and Deathfog, which is the White Void, aka Fog. And as the illustration states, pieces of the Dark Golden Lord exist in all planes of reality, meaning we destroyed these pieces of it in all the realities. My suspicion is that the world of Residual Life is structured somewhat like this: Sea of Chaos at the bottom, above that is Zen, above which we have the 4 worlds, out of which one the game takes place in. I have no clue which one though. It could also be a separate thing where there is the true world we know plus the 4 planes with their magic powers. All of this is further evidenced by a laptop found in the Sun Eater's Pillar. One statement seems to be a note left in on accident, saying, "Add, dark energy or 0 point is source of all things, the Golden Nightmare. Sea of Chaos, goal of the Lord of Darkness, Xenium." I suspect Xenium to be a 2010's Google Translator mishap to translate Xenium. We also actually get to see the true Sea of Chaos in the finale of the optional chapter Between World and Chaos. It's pure darkness with a few floating Zen islands. The trigger that kills you is called Sea of Chaos, and the middle sprite is called Lord of Nightmare. Remember, the Sea of Chaos is the Lord of Nightmares. What we see in Altar of Sacrifice is just how it manifested into the real world, in this case Zen. I'm unsure whether we ever visit any of the 4 planes of reality outside of these short moments, though I'd argue there to be a case made for the epilogue taking place in the Dark Star World and Chaotic Blue being where the Residual Point set ending takes place. I also believe that the red portal at the end of Residual Point is in the Sea of Chaos. The normal world could be the Death Fork or the Ruby Eye system, as it is to be noted that even though they got represented in many ways here, in Slayer's lore these worlds don't actually differentiate each other much. So just because there isn't a lot of dirt everywhere doesn't mean the Residual Point finale couldn't be set in the Chaotic Blue. It could also be that Residual Point, Residual Life and Residual Agent all take place in different planes, which would remove the aspect of the G-Man reverting time and instead just switching planes of reality. At this point it's worth going back to the Sun Eater's pillar, where we see this illustration rather quickly, which shows us the Lord of Nightmares at the top and the 4 worlds at the bottom. These are the same as this illustration of the many worlds of Slayers, which shows that the imagery in the Sun Eater's pillars are one-to-one recreations of these using brushes. This other illustration from Slayers gives us the names of each of them if you simply compare the symbols a bit. The motivations of this Lord of Nightmares also seem to be the same as that of Slayers. When you first encounter it, it talks about the One Universe, which lines up with the goal of the Lord of Nightmares, destroying all planes so that it all becomes the Sea of Chaos again. When defeating the Lord of Nightmares, it mentions that we destroyed the talisman system. This is another element of the Slayer story. The backstory of talismans changes depending on which version of the story you read. What is important is that talismans are used to be able to cast spells better, and specifically those of demons of the other planes of reality. The anime showed all talismans as red, though in the original novel it is made clear that they're white, blue, red and black respectively, one for each plane. Meaning that on top of all these chambers are the talismans of each planes of reality getting charged by Zen crystals of their respective worlds, which are taking energy from the Sea of Chaos. Every time you destroy a Zen crystal in one of the planes, that specific talisman disappears too, until there are none left over at the end. I'm sure that if it was possible, the creator would have made the Nihilant lose attacks after each destroyed talisman, though this is barely possible with Gold Source technology. There are also these statues of animals placed before each of the talismans. I can't really connect these to anything. They seem to represent each of their planes of reality. It's noteworthy that during this teleportation sequence where we briefly end up in the void, we also see an animal. It is likely that this is also the Sea of Chaos, and that this is thus the animal representing the Sea of Chaos. It also implies that a side effect of teleportation is being relocated to the Sea of Chaos, just like it does in the Between World and Chaos chapter at the end. As far as I can tell, the animal representation was made up by this mod. So, that's the Lord of Nightmares ticked off. Phew. Before I get into the tiny dwarf, I want to take a breather, as that was a massive lore dump and things are not getting any easier. I want to talk about the creator and the history of this mod. After it released and made its rounds, people really disliked Residual Life. At that point it still ended at the cliffhanger ending, the one I also remember playing all those years back. After all this critical feedback, the creator deleted the mod files off of ModDB and retreated to his personal Korean blog. This blog is very hard to access. You need to create an account on the completely Korean interface and then leave 3 comments and wait a week before you can download anything. The hate got to him, which is really sad, as I deem Residual Life as perhaps the most unique Half-Life 1 mod there is. Thankfully, someone that goes by Darkshift on YouTube has re-uploaded the mods on ModDB, and also made detailed walkthroughs showcasing all the secrets, and is, from all I can tell, the only person ever to beat this game without cheats and go every path. Without Darkshift, this video would never have been possible, so huge shout out to Darkshift for documenting everything. Go give him a sub. What is also worth mentioning in this section is that the creator was heavily affected by the Korean War, and harbors a deep hatred for China, Russia and obviously North Korea because of it. It is likely that the creator has relatives who fought in this war, and thus it is understandable that some of this trauma ended up manifesting itself in this mod, with recreations of barracks and one of the Chosen Reservoir, where an important battle of the Korean War took place. This isn't the only slice of the creator's life we see in this though. If you no-clip out of bounds or load maps up using the console, you'll often find rooms that feature K-pop stars or movie snippets. Sometimes also just straight up Guna material, which takes its worst form in Residual Agent. While the most current version doesn't have it, there used to be just straight up one of the most disgusting images I've ever seen in the mod select zone. The room that immediately loads up upon starting. There's also drawings of a woman seen in a movie without her shirt, which is also just odd and disrespectful towards the actress. This room is worse than anything Fake Factory ever did, and is literally the first thing you load into in this mod. I guess I should never have expected a person who made this series of mods to be normal. Also explains the weird metallic women in Zen. Getting back to lore though, what is it with the Black Sphere and the gate? For this we'll have to dive into full Metal Alchemist lore. I'm gonna try to stay in non-spoiler territory. This will get harder as I'm going along though, so feel free to skip the full Metal Alchemist segment if you plan on watching that anytime soon. The creator of this mod clearly enjoyed Full Metal Alchemist. There is less, but still major inspiration from it seen in this mod. Mainly the gate. The gate in Full Metal Alchemist is the entrance to God's domain. where no mortal being is to ever tread. A big part of Full Metal Alchemist lore is human transmutation, where humans create new body parts or even entirely new people through alchemy. This is deemed as the dark side of alchemy, as people are playing God. The biggest rule in alchemy, and thus in the world of Full Metal Alchemist, is the law of equivalent exchange. Human lives are deemed as priceless, and thus anyone attempting to create life creates an infinite debt in this exchange. Attempting to do this anyways will get you called into the Gate of Truth. Entering the Gate of Truth will force knowledge into the mind of the person that stepped into it, about alchemy, the universe, and everything else. Another character of Full Metal Alchemist is the Dwarf in the Flask, which I believe to be the same as the tiny dwarf boss fight and thus also the Black Orb. In Full Metal Alchemist, the dwarf eventually escapes the flask, through which he also takes on a different form. A big plot point of Full Metal Alchemist is that the dwarf attempts to do a big ritual, in which he tries to achieve a massive amount of power by channeling the souls of millions of dead and alive people into himself to become mightier than all. As is with equivalent exchange, everything that was lost has to be gained again, meaning that if he is successful, he gains the power equivalent to that of a divine being. That is the least spoilery way I could describe it. It's here that there's a logical explanation for the term Sun Eater's Pillar. The dwarf in the flask calls the people he plans to sacrifice Hitobashira in Japanese, which specifically refers to 5 alchemists that have committed transmutation. It turns out that the literal translation of the original term Hitobashira would actually be human pillars. One step of the dwarf's plan is also that it has to take place on the day of an eclipse. Given that the Sun Eater's Pillar is this timeline's version of the Combine, or at least part of it, this could also partly be in reference to the Combine harvesting the power of a sun in the Epistle 3 story. Perhaps this process also helps charge up the dwarf in the flask. In this case, the entire structure belongs to the dwarf, the Sun Eater, and it was designed to fulfill its plans of becoming a godlike being. It's a pillar, just like the Hitobashira in Full Metal Alchemist, which by the way requires 5 of them, just like we have to unlock 5 secrets, and just like there are 5 pillars at all the altars, and just like there are 5 circles on this drawing you find the Sun Eater's Pillar, which also fits the exact graphic of the giant transmutation circle that the dwarf in the flask plans to sacrifice. The one next to it fits the reverse zone, which would be way too hard to explain right now. And the other one I still like an explanation for. There are more circles in Full Metal Alchemist that might fit this. Both the circles in the Circle of Death achievement also represent these circles. To get back to Slayers, it is likely that the 5 rings here represent the 5 types of magic in Slayers. There are only 4 main ones: black, white, holy, and shamanistic. There is a 5th one though to some degree, which is the most dangerous type, chaos magic, a form of magic that uses the power of the Lord of Nightmares itself. If cast incorrectly, it has the power to destroy worlds, thus it is only rarely used. The middle dot would be the dwarf in the flask itself, just like it has to be positioned in the middle of the sacrifice in Full Metal Alchemist. Alternatively, it could be the gods or demons of each plane plus the Lord of Nightmares as the green ring. We wouldn't know who the gods or demons of these universes are though. So the entire purpose of the Sun Eater's Pillar is to create a battle just like the dwarf in the flask did in Full Metal Alchemist, to then have enough blood spilled in a small vicinity to then activate the tiny dwarf that is placed right in the middle, presumably right here in the Chaotic Blue chapter. On top of that, we see a bunch of different transmutation circles in the same level we see this drawing on the floor, which comes straight out of Full Metal Alchemist lore. All this is also exactly what the one laptop talked about, someone creating a large enough human sacrifice, fields of blood, exactly what the Resonance Cascade caused. And if you need the final nail in the coffin to prove this theory, if you look at the Tiny Dwarf boss fight's map file and check the name of the brushes placed around the orb, they're called Flask, which fit right into the Dwarf in the Flask name. And in the end, after defeating the Tiny Dwarf, it is not the dwarf itself talking to us, but the gate. I'm not sure what exactly the words mean, and also not sure what Ruby Eye System is key means. I suspect this may be explored in Residual Agent eventually. And now for a very heavy Full Metal Alchemist spoiler. Just skip forward 10 seconds to not hear it. 3, 2, 1. Eventually in Full Metal Alchemist, this exact scene happens too, where the dwarf gets taken back into the gate by the eye. That's the spoilers done. Thank you. As for the eye at the door when no secrets are completed that sends us back to the other path, I suspect this to simply be there to recreate the eye in the gate from Full Metal Alchemist, just for reference's sake. I don't think there's an actual explanation. I also think it's fair to call the one path the Slayer's path, and the other one the Full Metal Alchemist path, even if both influence one another in small ways. It's unclear if the Tiny Dwarf was aware of the Lord of Nightmares and vice versa. I suspect that they were, but that both were powerless to do something against each other, at least at the moment we encounter them. We have one final player in all this, the G-Man. Personally, I doubt the G-Man ever had a real rhyme or reason to him in this story. I like the idea that the Sea of Chaos is what the G-Man places his candidates into in stasis, but outside of that, it simply seems that the G-Man doesn't allow for the planned events to not happen. In multiple endings do we receive the message, subject attempts to mess up the progress. And he also offered the player to just stop at this segment, and if you refused, he placed you right next to a Gargantua. G-Man simply rewinds time whenever someone does something that steps outside of his plan. Maybe the law of residual life is that the tiny dwarf is meant to become the G-Man eventually, and the future G-Man goes back in time to make sure that happens by continuously resetting the timeline until it works. Like going into the casino and putting it all on black and just rewinding time every time it doesn't hit. But this time the odds are not 1 to 2 but 1 to infinity. But to beat infinity you simply need infinite time. Monkeys on a typewriter and stuff. Given that every single chapter in Residual Agent has the word blood in its title, we can assume it will continue with the same law brought forward by Residual Life with the whole field of blood and everything. I assume it will be explaining why the Ruby Eye system is key, and perhaps confirm if the 5 rings here are the magical powers or the gods/demons. Perhaps we'll finally face these beings in this mod, or at least find out what they are. Or perhaps it's just a mod where you play as a zombie, that could also happen. So that's all the characters explained. To quickly summarize, the Residual Saga continuously either resets time or switches planes of reality, of which either 4 or 5 main worlds exist depending on what you believe. Separately, there's the tiny dwarf that's in charge of a citadel-like structure and of Zen creatures, and which also somehow caused the Black Mesa incident and plans to use it to sacrifice all the fallen souls there to channel energy into itself to become a god. At the same time we have a lot of nightmares that's attempting to destroy all planes of reality so that everything returns to the Sea of Chaos, which is what the Lord of Nightmares is itself. The Sea of Chaos is where Zen crystals derive their energy from, and with which the manifestation of the Lord of Nightmares charges itself in the Altar of Sacrifice. The player can only defeat one of these in a singular playthrough. Meanwhile, the G-Man seems to do everything in his power, including reverting time or switching universes to make sure the tiny dwarf gets what it wants. Which could mean they're both working together, or the G-Man has an interest in the tiny dwarf becoming a divine being. A very normal story if you ask me. Wrapping up, I can only say that I'm not sure I'm a huge fan of the creator themselves, but that I'd also be lying if I said that this isn't the most intriguing project I've ever analyzed. My only disappointment is that there's absolutely nothing to take away from this experience. No emotions to be felt. It's just a mixed retelling of 2 animes in a worse way. The creator seems to have a problem trying to create something completely original. Residual Point is a remix of Half-Life 1. And Residual Life is a remix of Half-Life 1, Slayers and Full Metal Alchemist. Residual Agent seems to be a somewhat unique thing thus far, even if it uses a lot of environments from Residual Life. But Residual Agent is also only in a pre-alpha state basically anyways. Residual Life can be seen as a love letter to Slayers and Full Metal Alchemist, but there's no message in these letters unless you count the Guna imagery, which lessens their worth greatly in my eyes. It's fun to find the parallels to the anime, but for most people that play it, it will either be a good run-of-the-mill Half-Life 1 mod, or the most torturous and most unrewarding experience ever. Managing to untangle the story fills me with no emotions outside of a sense of pride and accomplishment, which we all know isn't worth a lot on its own. Unless you want to be able to claim to have beaten the hardest challenge the extended Half-Life universe has to offer, I suggest staying away from the secrets, and instead just play Residual Point and a regular path of Residual Life, which can be fun experiences on their own, albeit very hard ones that sometimes get a bit mazy, but still more than recommendable in my books. And if you actually care about lore and a good story, just watch Full Metal Alchemist and Slayers on their own. Reading up on all this has actually made me very interested in Full Metal Alchemist, to be honest, even after having spoiled most of the story for myself in the process. I legit almost went insane analyzing this mod story, so if you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing, and perhaps even sharing. Let me know what you think of the whole Residual Saga. I'm for sure gonna try and read most of them. Also consider joining the Discord, link is in the description. And otherwise, thank you for watching.